Welcome everyone to another Indypodcaster episode, and this is another podcast for which we are grateful to Glasgow Pensioners for Indy for having organised a speaker. And the speaker is Anthony Carroll, Bailey Anthony Carroll. He's a councillor at Glasgow City Council.
And it was another really good, interesting talk. It was a long talk because the audience just had so much to ask and so much to say, actually. A lot of interaction, most of which I've had to cut out, partly because of length, but also because you just couldn't make out what was being said.
They were talking over one another, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we always do that at Pensioners for Indy meetings.
Yeah. I mean, they were engaged, that's for sure.
Yeah, but, absolutely.
And Anthony, who I've not come across before, he handled it all very well.
He's a youngish, let's say, man.
Well, he was 16 in the Indy ref. That was his first ever vote.
Right.
I was very impressed with him and the breadth of his knowledge and the way he dealt with what was quite a barrage of questions at some points. The downside, and we will just flag this up front, the audio is not as good as we've had it in the past. I don't think it's too bad. Yeah. I think you'll forget about it when you start watching. So shall we head over to...
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go to the Bacchus Bar.
The discussion starts with Anthony relaying what he's finding on the doorsteps.
I represent Medicine, Hag Hill, and I'll go around Shelton and Drum Chapel as well. I've been knocking doors, and the big thing has been about people feeling disillusioned, feeling that they have no one that's championing a different vision for the country. They just want change, they want something to change. Nothing's changing. The ultimate change is independence, and I think that's one side both for us as the Greens and any other independence party, and indeed the wider movement needs to be a lightning rod for right now. So from the Green perspective, we've recently been trying to re-energise our Green Yes movement. To be fair, we're a much smaller party than some other pro-independence parties, so we don't have as many members, but we have been trying to reactivate to have policy discussions on certain areas like energy, like on nationalisation of different industries, things like this, to make that case stronger when we get into the Holyrood election. But it doesn't stop that from trying to be built up the now. One side for us is always about community empowerment, and that's something I think can be really strong for the independence movement in a really kind of big way. When you see stuff down in Reform doing well, really doing much campaigning, it's all of the social community side of things that have been happening. They've got lots of community spaces that they take. They have social spaces where people meet. That side is a hook in for communities who have not had that because of the austerity affecting their community spaces being closed down, their spaces to meet and congregate as people being shut from the effects of austerity. That is a side that, again, the independence movement, I think, could potentially enter into to bring those spaces to life in a way for communities, to try and actually be a lightning rod for those communities to be welcomed into a space. And when it comes to the issues for us of why we want independence, because we're a Green Party, we want to have a sustainable, self-reliant planet, and that's the case of having a sustainable, self-reliant Scotland. It's the same thing applied down onto a national level, but also on a local level too, when it comes to communities to be self-reliant, having more support from themselves, and that's what is the starting block, I think, for a lot of the independence movement too, is to try and rebuild those communities, because all those communities that we were discussing beforehand just there, that were so enthusiastic about independence in 2014, that voted in record numbers and have not voted in those record numbers again, because they didn't have that enthusiasm for that radical alternative vision. They didn't have that grassroots build of the community to believe in that, to support them to believe in that and go therefore to vote for that. That's where a lot of the energy can be and should be, both from any political party that supports independence, but also from the grassroots too. And yeah, when it comes to what we do at a Scottish level, in the Scottish Parliament, issues about things like energy and acting like we are an independent nation in terms of what we can achieve, what we want to achieve, to the absolute limit of what we can do, is what we need to be doing on that level, but also on the local level, to show if we can be as radical pushing what we can do on self-governance, self-sustainability on a local level. It infuses areas that think, oh, it's just a certain area of the country sort of thing that they're doing that. It's just it empowers people to actually believe that things can change. For example, on the local level, we've been doing community projects for community energy projects where the money has been going back into different communities. It's been called the Cllr. So there's projects in Easterhouse that's going to fund community projects and community services in the area, but otherwise that money might not be there to invest in the local community. It's community wealth building when you start building up that vision for people on a local level and they go, well, this can happen here. Why can't it happen across the country? Why can't we have all those powers to be able to do that? So for us as the Greens, it's to build from that small local level, saying yes, we can start as much as we can with what the powers we have right now to try and improve the better lot of communities left behind, to then inspire them to say, well, there's more we can do, there's more that we can build up on a local level to a national level, and the powers that we deserve to be able to do that on our national parliament. And that's the journey I think we need to go on of empowerment, but also that social side as well, to make sure communities feel that actual support with one another. A big thing right now has been that lack of trust within communities with each other, and we hear that from the rhetoric down south. Keir Starmer's speech when it came to that white paper he did on immigration, and he said we were going to become an island of strangers. That in particular was, I think, the speech that really has riled me most up this past year about the ideology of Westminster is just to stoke division, stoke a small amount against another amount to be able to try and better their lot at an election, not better the lot of the communities they're meant to serve. And that idea that we're an island of strangers, that there's a country that's been experimented on, all of these ugly ideas have started to cement because so many people have felt scared and felt, sure, that's what it is, that must be it, because there's no other thing that has been the issues that has been, it's been Westminster and it's been an austerity over decades. And the only way to try and rebuild that, I think, is by trying to rebuild communities on those local levels, trying to rebuild that trust on a local level to say there is a genuine radical alternative. That isn't really radical. It seems radical compared to the extremities we faced with Westminster over the past decades in particular, but it genuinely is an alternate vision that Reform can't paint. They can't paint that picture of an independent Scotland because they are really tied into that establishment as much as they pretend to not be an anti-establishment voice. This is the ultimate anti-establishment voice. As Greens, we're very anti-establishment and want to continue to be part of that voice too. So yeah, that's a very kind of brief overview of just why we feel very important about independence at this point, but also, you know, the importance of it at this very moment too, more widely with what we face with Reform, is, I think, needs to be a lightning rod moment for parties to really prioritise this when we get through to Holyrood coming up. This has to be the get out card for folk. This has to be the contrasting vision to what could come down the line from Reform, because if we don't, then we risk there being the worst excesses of British unions we've ever seen, in the form of the most richest and ugliest ideas of politics we've seen in many years. So yeah, I'm open to any question, any thoughts about it as well, and what you want to see as well too, because I'm really keen to hear that side of it.
The first question was about why George Square is being renovated.
It seemed to be one that they agreed during COVID because of when they closed off those two lanes at the side, so they thought we'll formalise it, but I don't know why they chose now to formalise it, especially because I don't think it's going to be open even when the Commonwealth Games are coming. So like, why have we closed it in time for that? Well, that was a big part of it as well, was asking to get removed of the Queen Victoria statue, stuff
Get
like
rid
that.
of that.
And repeal
Change the name.
See if the Nelson Mandela folk wanted to put the Nelson Mandela statue in George Square. I had a chat with them last week about it as well, but they have got confirmation for the spot they're having in Nelson Mandela Place now, so that statue is going to be at the place. So they've got a spot now that's going to, I think it's going to be next October, it's going to be installed in. But I know, so when it came to committees like that, there's been questions about trying to find different ways to tackle empty homes, empty buildings in particular, and things like
people's
palace.
are really concerned about, you know. It's just so sad to see it like that, and tourist bus comes right round there.
It's been one thing that they've been trying to get a capital, so they've got some amount of capital funding.
Well, we could have used the money for George Square to do it.
True. But it was one of these shared prosperity funds things that the UK government wanted to say, you're doing that here. And they went, okay, well, guess we're doing just at that time. Even though there's, to be honest, priority ones that things like the People's Palace.
Not immediately what the income must be as soon as the
So they have a voice in what you spend it on?
You have, to an extent, it's ultimately how much the administration can press the UK government, or even if it's a Scottish government funding, to say, we want to spend on this project. Because we're not in administration, we're in opposition, we work with them in a constructive way, but we're not in administration. So we try to push on projects. So there was some capital for the kind of making it safe, making the case to get more funding for the People's Palace plan. I don't know where it is right now, because that was maybe about 2 months ago.
More information about the Easter House Energy Project.
It's through the renewable energy itself, so the project's the Community Renewable Energy Framework. It's a new project that community groups get buy-in with the council, and there's funding available from some organisation, Scottish Government, I think it's named now, and they install renewable energy projects within their local community, and the energy that they use, they sell, and using that money then, the profits of that money after their capital costs to fund that goes back into the community projects themselves and the community organisations.
So where would they install it? In the hubs? Not in people's homes, in the hubs?
Yeah, so it would be either that or pieces of derelict lands that have been derelict decades as well. So there's two in Easter House, one in Milton. There's a group in Royston that have been challenging, are keen to do it in Royston too, to generate funds for community projects in the area. So it's an example of kind of community wealth building, essentially, to say instead of big corporations owning all of the renewable energy, so we don't just have BP changing their logo to British Wind or whatever. We're having actual communities benefit from renewables as well on a local level, especially for communities that can really benefit from FABA funding as well through community wealth building.
Windmill things, or is it solar power?
It's predominantly solar. Some of them could be winds as well. Ground source heat as well is one, and air source heat as well. Some housing associations have been doing that. For example, in high rises in Swinney, that's cut bills for tenants by about 2 months. So there's things like that. It's smaller in scale because it's a council that's been ravaged by a 15 year of austerity, but we have been trying where we can to seek these funds to help communities do projects like this to then in turn make a sustainable community, enterprise essentially for
Nobody knows that.
Well, that's the thing. We technically are an energy provider already. I only found it out this year. It was something that was I didn't find out until when we had this launch for the Community Renewable Energy Project last month. Apparently the council runs the district heating services in Kilmarnock still from the Commonwealth Games. So we're technically an energy provider still. So when we're making this plan, there's genuine opportunities for us to borrow capital to an extent. I don't know how much we can, not much. We could potentially be an energy company in a way to be able to generate projects like this.
And are all the parties agreeing?
The SNP have been open to it. They've been more open to it more recently. We've been pushing the door about it quite a bit. I mean, it's not much to say that you're having a chat with someone in the Labour Party about it. It's like chatting with a brick wall. They don't know what you're on about. A lot of the time, more of the reform guy now. There is, I think, hopefully movement on that. Even if it's not just the community-based ones, but also there's a great cooperative as well, called Glasgow Community Energy too, that do community-based energy projects as a cooperative model. So members join as a co-op, and those members get dividends from that, and they also have a community fund that where all the profit goes to the community groups they've built their solar on. So there's solar on Pollock Shields primary they've built. All of that has went back to different groups around Pollock Shield. So this year, one of the commitments we got was about 7 million in the budget for capital borrowing to make energy projects on council buildings, basically to reduce our bill first and see how it works
Yeah.
with a financial model. I think it's Kelvin Hall and some of the buildings around there that the council owns, they've been putting the solars on, and we'll see how that model works over this year.
Could more community funds come from wind farms?
Yeah, it's been definitely something we've been pushing for. There's a current name of national organisation that does it now. I've been trying to push for a national target of how much community-based energy production there is. I think it's maybe 2 megawatts at least. They want to start to get that generation of community-based renewable energy. So we've been working on a practical level of how to do that, especially on councils in particular, to make stipulations in any planning conditions. An example of that's been up in Shetland, with one of my colleagues up there, Alex Armitage, has been really pushing that side of it, where a lot of the oil companies who have been based around there have been trying to tip the toes into wind. He's been saying we should be having that as part of what Shetland does, and having essentially the boon of funds that they get from the oil industry instead shifting to there for community-based projects instead. So it's something that we've been on a local level been keen to see. It's not much, unfortunately, in Glasgow in terms of wind farms that we have.
Off the east coast, there's massive wind farms out at sea.
Yeah, it has been something we've been keen of, not just also in terms of like the access or even the ownership of it as well. So having some part of it being a community organisation or consortium owning part of the project, so having maybe a joint venture, but also in terms of the supply chain as well, because the big issue sometimes with our ideas in Scotland right now is the supply chain of work sometimes just being outsourced to someone else, and no having proper training taking place within Scotland to build up the workforce for what should be a new renewables revolution, really, where we need to be seeing more of that supply chain work, apprenticeship work, the wider network of, if you want to do a just transition, start really in and out, and have that within your stipulations of conditions when it comes to planning consents, when it comes to your procurement work, when it comes to any of these projects being tried to come up with a big company in that way. So that's something I've been very keen, and other, at least councillors that we have across the country have been pushing for when they've had applications come through in their local authority. We haven't got a councillor in every council, there's about 13 councils we're on out of 32, but ones like have been affected by that, like Shetland, there has been that kind of proactive push from those that we do have up there.
And what about zonal energy pricing?
It makes sense. I don't know why it's been such a blockage, but I know why it's been such a blockage for the UK Labour Party. But it's been a big frustration because it is ought to be the natural benefit that we would have from the generation of the work that we are doing and the shift that has been in to try and have renewables within our energy supply system, and for that not to benefit the people who have been making that, which has been Scotland. It's the Labour Party doing as they usually do, trying to centralise their ideas of how things are meant to be. It's bizarre that there's been no proper push on Scottish Labour folk about this.
And what's it like working with Labour colleagues?
I'll give you an example, I guess, of how the relation with Labour is, because, like, as myself, I'm kind of an eco-socialist guy. There would be things that I would have agreed with Labour on, policy, especially under Corbyn, was agreeing on. The issue in particular with Scottish Labour, and it's felt every day in those chambers, is that they don't want to work with anyone who has any inkling of breaking up the British state, to the detriment of even things we might agree upon. Where even the left-wing members within, which are very few of them, but even those within the Labour Party of Scotland, it's impossible to actually achieve things practically to the detriment. I would say not just of the city in terms of the council, equally in Holyrood too. They do not want to work in a constructive way, because whenever I chat to them about, say, a motion or something that's happening, or there's an issue coming up and I want some support to get something passed, they will refer to, say, the SNP as the NAPS, and that's really sort of jibey way all the time. But we just want to, like, for example, pass a policy about affordable housing, to have us have 25% affordable housing, and it was just impossible to chat to them because they have this ingrained thing of not wanting to work inherently natural, like the SNP at all, and then also with us,
Anybody for independence?
yeah, the main principle.
Yes, the main principle, that was it.
And that's been one of the big barriers, not just in terms of the barrier towards what we have in politics, but towards advancing progressive policies that on paper, say, Labour Party members, Labour supporters would agree or want them to be doing, but they have this intrinsic thing ingrained in some of the especially senior Labour politicians. It's genuinely frustrating because I want to work together on issues on a local level that we can do together. But when you have something like that so systemic, it makes it so hard to do that. And it's one of the big frustrations that I try to make people aware of, because people keep saying, why don't you just work all together better in the council instead of this ramming? And it's like, you try to, but you can, but sometimes there's people who do treat it like it is this like playground mentality about they are that different, they support that different team as it were.
How do we engage the electorate, particularly the young?
That's the thing, especially with social media, basically
exactly.
really playing rings around everyone when it comes to things
Getting
like
them
social media.
feeling that if their vote matters.
Because I'm on TikTok, so I use TikTok a lot to share what I'm doing locally. And I get folks saying, "What's on your TikTok about Royston Road or whatever?" And people pick up on it that otherwise won't be here from the Glasgow Times. Young people, because that's the formats of communicating with people are changing, and every party needs to get savvy with that. We sometimes can, but it's not a sustained effort for us at least being more out there, especially young people. And I guess there's another thing for the wider independence movement as well, of how you engage young people as well. Because I'm trying to go different events locally in the area, also with like schools, things like that, and they are a bit surprised that I'm a councillor. I so go around to places like St. Roch's and things like that, and what's it called? Modern studies classes, something like that. They were asked to come in to chat to them. The issue for that is that it's preaching to the converted of kids that are interested to do modern studies. But I think it'd be nicer to have schools to have more civic discussions and indeed debates as well, because I remember, the independence referendum was my first vote. I was 16 when the referendum happened. In the school, it was such an electric atmosphere because we were having debates, discussions in the school. We didn't have any discussions in modern studies about independence. It was discussions that were happening outside modern studies classes. It was discussions that were happening at lunchtimes, at different even other classes. Like we were having a French class, and the whole class was just about independence. A bit of it in French, we tried, but and it was just infecting the school in a great way, because kids were discussing it, teachers were allowing that discussion. But once they would allow that, regardless of the subject, and I think that's sometimes where it needs to be pushed. Just like you say, everything is political, not just the modern studies classes, but if you go through it in each subject, there's ways for that to kind of be discussed at different points. And so when it comes to things like the elections coming up, I do think that sort of spirit of engagement that was happening during the referendum, where young people were really, it was genuinely something we discussed as teenagers in a way that I don't think any other generation of teenagers was discussing in any other sort of generation. That spirit does need to return when it comes to like democratic events.
It's just all falling away.
But we need people on every day to be engaged in politics, because it's more important in the council elections. It's getting folk to turn out for that, and then that builds up to the national elections, and getting folk to turn out to vote hardcore. It's not easy, and apathy wins all the time.
And I think that's the spirit I was talking about with what we face right now with the idea of apathy. When I was mentioning that Easter House by-election where it was about 10-11% turnout, Reform lost that seat only by about 150 votes or so. So we nearly won their first election in Scotland there, just from sheer apathy. Similar really with having by-election, because the folk who are apathetic about politics weren't turning out, well, now are apathetic, aren't turning out. The folk who are infused were infused about reform. Not many were infused about independence. Not many are infused about that sort of radical change as well. because they want something to change, and that was somehow the model they thought we'll go for. And so it's trying to wrestle back that enthusiasm, because it will not just bring the folk who are currently infused with reform, but try to infuse the people who were voting for pro-independence parties, or even other progressive, like supposedly progressive parties like Labour, because they just feel apathy about governing parties right now. And if the independence movement is that sort of anti-establishment voice that can infuse those two camps, that's where you can see that start to rise when it comes to council elections, national elections.
Thoughts on John Swinney's independence plan?
When I saw, I think, John Swinney's things about his plan for sentences that were as obvious as breathing, about what he would need to be
And
doing
also
to...
pretty familiar from the others.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it didn't cement what concretely is going to happen, and that's the issue. I mean, even a few years ago, when, say, late 2010s and such, where there was the referendum act, there was things like this, there was proper kind of legislative attempts, there was things that were trying to impress a moral kind of pressure upon the UK government. There isn't that sense about it. There's a sense of cautiousness about it from the Scottish government right now against them.
Sense of
In fact, it's about all you get from them about every issue. I think is that sense of cautiousness.
Yeah.
And when it comes to what is meant to be their drive and ambition, I don't see it. And I don't see that as an emergency in the same way, like I say, folk are wanting that anti-establishment kind of urgency that they get from when, say, Farage goes out and says, after like a riot down in the south of England, and he's saying we're on the verge of societal collapse, if you don't get me into, we can't have a crime in the country. He's painting an absolutely answer picture, but he's painting a sense of urgency about what he's doing. Where's the urgency about saying we need to be painting that sense of urgency about everything? But it's I guess defining yourself is the main thing about it right now.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is that lack of definition. I mean, even was that poll there last week, just before they were about to announce that new Corbyn Sultana party, and they were level with Labour. And they've not just a names that were for a party, but they were level with Labour, and it showed they were clearly defining we are left wing people who used to be in Labour and fed up with that.
Aye.
If you're fed up, that's what we're about.
Yeah.
And that's a clear definition. And people went in those polls, that's a solid 10-15% of the country suddenly is now behind that.
Yeah.
You need to be clear about what you're defining, and that's not what's happening with the Scottish government. Clearly saying, right, independence is going to be the clear defining thing we will have, because when they were doing this thing about being anti-reform, you're defining yourselves against someone else. You distort yourself from a mirror image of what someone else is holding up to you. Just define yourself, just say, we are pro-independence party. We are going to be having in our manifesto the commitment of that referendum per the referendum act 2020 that allows us that mandate to do it. We're going to do it. They need to be clear about how you define that, and also about even your domestic agendas of being able to govern like as if you are an independent country already.
Yes.
Then the more cautious approaches that
Push
have
against the
every
limits of devolution all the time.
And what about Salvo and the United Nations bid?
I wouldn't object to people trying to make that case. I guess for myself, we still need to the history of Scotland. We can't absolve ourselves from being part of what that has been, because the whole idea of when we entered that union in 1707, why
took full advantage of the colony, colonising.
We were very much doing that to make up for the money that we lost from attempting to colonise and stuff like that. It's a history that's not absolved of colonisation in its own right and being part of the empire that went off to colonise even more. I wouldn't personally think it to be the case that of us being a colony in that way. Like you say, what we are currently facing in terms of like what demolition is, but I wouldn't categorise it as that, just because of what the historic involvement in actual proper colonisation was, because it was much more brutal than what
Oh, yeah.
we currently face. Even though there are still things that are authoritarian that we face right now, we're not in the same scope of what colonies were. And I think that's tied into one thing that we're saying about defining yourself as well. I think it's an important part that might actually come more to like focus, especially coming up to next year's election, will be about how can you define what we are. There might be folk doing ideas about things like the threshold situations that they put on for, say, Northern Ireland in terms of like their referendum, things like that. I feel, especially with this case, if it's more prominence given in the run-up as well, and like I say, if there's more fight of a definition of what you're doing as a cause, then things like that might come to a head potentially to say, right, we'll need to, like, say, if it's going to be an election on independence, we need to define what we're being wanting to fight independence from, what people are who are wanting to fight for a union is, in terms of the definition of what that is as well. Because it's been more on the vagaries in the past few years than about the actual concrete side of it. So it will, outside of the case in the UN, I think we'll have that context come to light if, like I say, people have to be more definitive about what they want to do, what their driving ambition is, to try and fight the rise of something that, like reform, to be able to have that vision of what you want to do as an alternative, and defining what it is you're fighting for, to be separated against.
And what's going to be in the Greens manifesto for 2026?
I mean, we're still writing up our manifesto now, and I think one of the big things is, like we were talking about earlier, with like pushing things to the max, is things like that taxation systems the Trade Union Council had, in terms of properly pushing at the edges of our taxation to make sure we're taxing the rich more, and use the mechanisms that are nichely hidden in the law to be able to actually activate that.
It's about land taxation.
Yes, so land tax will be in it. That's, I mean, it's not a giveaway that land tax is in the Green Manifesto, but it's a bit like, I mean, around the north east of Glasgow, people might not think that will benefit a lot from land reform, but 10% of the north east of Glasgow is derelict land, and so forcing landowners to be able to utilise the land, or being able to make it into a bit more productive use is a key mechanism you can use through that. Things around the rent controls as well, to make sure that it's properly implemented is going to probably be in it too, because it's going to cost councils to resource to be able to know how much the rent is in areas. You know, I'm in four figures now from a very bad 2-bedroom flat in the east of Glasgow, which you would not have had about 5-10 years ago. But that's what rent is like in the private sector, especially like you say with young people. So that's the number one issue I get from young people all the time, is the rent.
Rent's too high.
It's way too high. It's a really kind of big issue, especially for younger people.
As long as it's not like one scenario fits all, because there's various Glasgow's horrendous outlying areas. It's not.
I know, yeah. So it's not having like a uniform rent control thing. It's given the power for local authorities to enforce, and so it would be up for local authorities to do it from different areas.
So what's holding them back from building more social housing? Because they seem to be only building nothing but student flats.
That's a very good question. So I mentioned earlier I'm on that Economy Housing Committee, and we had a paper come about affordable housing as a policy for our new city development plan. And that thing NPF4 the Scottish Government did, which meant to have 25% affordable housing with every housing development you do. Glasgow's not doing that. So I tried to put an amendment in to make us implement Scottish Government guidance. Make sure every development has 25%, because there's so many.
50%.
It should be, to be honest, but it's because as a minimum we're not even getting that from any of these student housing developments or the big private ones in the periphery of the city. So at least try to force an amount, of any amount, just get more affordable housing from these people who are making more from whole private sale developments.
Who's buying these houses?
It's been landlords that are, not all of the thing, but a lot. Like I've seen examples with, for example, in Sighthill, where I represent the there's big regeneration happening there, and they built a portion of private to buy houses. I've been seeing them on Airbnb, and I'm thinking that these are like family-sized houses that really could like benefit us during the housing crisis right now for families that have been seeing on my waiting list for about years in temporary accommodation, and what having these houses be bought up by landlords, but give the portfolio holders and all of this, put them on Airbnb, to put them on private rent for £1,200 and all of this, and it's not benefiting the actual people.
That must be so frustrating.
Which is why I was pressing for these at least mandatory thresholds about, say, these affordable housing 25%. So whatever that didn't pass, it was ruled incompetent by the officers in the housing department, because apparently you can't change a city development plan whilst it is in place. I don't know why that's the case.
Anything to change?
Apparently we need to wait every 5 years before thinking of changing anything. It was daft. Thankfully it is up for review right now as well. So there's a workshop in August about the new city development plan on affordable housing, which is where I'll be pressing for that to happen. But the fact it takes that long to try and change what should be the case ties into the issue of the sense of urgency I was talking about earlier. But we need to have that sense of urgency when talking about issues like this, like you were saying earlier about the sense of local issues, and one of them is housing, is that folk can't get a house. And having that sense of urgency saying, we need this policy in place, or we're not going to be addressing the housing crisis, you're going to have more people on waiting lists, you don't have all of that. And some people feel like when I raise those issues, I get a bit of frown looks from some SNP colleagues about it. But I'm doing it because we have this sense of common purpose about trying to do our best, and I'm just trying to add that sense of urgency to it, because that's the only way to try and get that message across, that we are on board with people who are suffering right now and we're wanting to change it. If we're facing those barriers, we need to break down those barriers, and I'm here to work with you to try and break it down so that we can have more, especially social homes being built at this time. And that's just tying back into the question about what is in the manifesto. We'll be asking about increasing the funding grants for social landlords to be able to build more social housing as well.
Does the city not build any houses?
No, since Labour sold it off, when was that, 20 years ago now, all of the affordable housing supply programme funding goes to the about 70 odd social housing associations we've got around the city, which, to be honest, is probably the better way to have more community-based housing associations. Then it's where you find more better housing stock, quality of housing, and rent prices in community-based housing associations, and that's where I think that support needs to be built up from more.
Are they building houses?
They are, like, there are ones getting Mary Hill's doing ones with Mary Hill's housing now. Millen Bank even are doing the old Hag Hill School.
Are refugees adding to the housing problem?
One of the issues of the state I have for the UK government is when they have, for short-term gain, for political parties to make themselves look better for their own base. Because that's what happened with the Tories there just before the 2024 election. They decided to clear the backlog of asylum seeker cases and just be like, just accept, reject, stamp. And it caused everyone to get a result about what their status was. But then refugees were like, well, where do I go now? Because I thought I had time to figure out where to get a house, and when you essentially leave people just to they go, it's the council's responsibility, we can deal with that. And that's been the case. We've had about 3,500 people homeless in Glasgow. 1,700 of them are refugees in the past 18 months because of the UK government. It's not that there's been a massive increase in terms of like refugees. It's about the process of how the UK government decided to deal with the asylum seeker process. It's just rubber stamping to make it seem in the press before they lost the election that they were going to be clearing the backlog. That's one thing I'm pushing for in the manifesto. It's been about having any councils in Scotland having the ability to be able to control asylum seeker housing itself, and they'll have mayors or contractors like this come into it. Because these private companies, they're not doing it for the better of asylum seekers, they're not doing it for anyone. They just want the money out of it. If we can become providers, if local authorities can become providers, it helps us be able to actually have better support so that folk aren't just being like, right, off to the local authority, just go into that homeless waiting list and see how it goes. Instead, we can actually proactively work to find a way, and it would help reduce the issues we are having with homelessness now, because we can work with asylum seekers in advance. And that's the big thing. It's never been about asylum seekers. It's just I wish. I hope so. I mean, it's another talked issue because people don't talk about the practicalities a lot. It's just been like, oh, it's the asylum seekers in those hotels. It's the government's lack of care for what should be a humane system that works for the betterment of everyone involved and not just try and pit one against another.
Was the Grangemouth closure the fault of the Greens?
We've had this a fair bit because Hope bring this up. And so our MSP for the Central Region, Gillian McKay, is from Grangemouth. She knows naturally very well and has been working with the workers on Unite about this for ages, because it ties into what I was saying earlier about with the when we're talking about the wind energy production, and also the retention of skills in Scotland, the skilled workers in Scotland, and this is the workforce that can do that. The refinery work as well it's not something that disappears overnight. It's one thing I think Laura Slater was putting into the circular economy bill was essentially whenever you have skilled workforces like that, a lot of times just go around there just try and figure out in the short term with DWP what your skills are and do a whole skills matrix about what you can maybe do and do some sort of ill-fitting thing about it. And so she's been working about these skilled passports to essentially like, here's your skills, here's what the industry is you've been in, and it fast tracks you into other, in particular, renewable industries where that's the case. So things like that I think are going to be quite important in general about just transitions from different older workforces. But it's something that right now should be sped up to help the workforces in Grangemouth in particular. I mean, I remember Michael Shanks go on about it, but I've not seen a thing really about it, just being said, well, it's a private decision, it's private. And as if, like in the first instance, that something like Grangemouth should have been a private enterprise having driven a
rat of the first order.
Exactly, like he is only in it for the profit making. He can still fund this, he's still spending hundreds of millions on other projects of his own vanity, and yet he's not backing workers in Scotland about it. Industries like this in the first instance ought to be nationalised anyway, I would personally, and Gillian's been calling for that as well, as about having more national control and more public say in these industries, so that regardless of where we then want to take them in terms of that just transition and make sure the workforce can move into these areas where we're having these renewable revolution we want to see, it needs to be within the public hands. Because I think it was Jim Ratcliffe who was predominantly blaming us for the closure, and I don't see that out of the trajectory of where things are going in terms of getting to net zero and things like that, why he thought now was the time to do that, and there was more other decisions that he wanted to do in terms of financial assets he wanted to release to be able to just spend it all on another project for that. It's the same thing you see in certain other industries as well. I mean, for example, I work with buses with my girls are saying that they'll go bust if there was any franchising of the bus services within the Strathclyde region, which is a nonsense, because the reason they try to what they do in terms of the extraction of the profits that they make is at the detriment of communities to make the service actually work, because you're not doing as many routes that communities really want, because you're just doing the most profitable ones. And so in turn folk don't use the bus because they're like, well, I can't get it because it's not connected in my area. Even though it might be a smaller area, they just don't have it, so in turn bus usages go down. When you have something like franchising, when you're controlling in terms of the pricing and also the routages, you're bringing more people into it because they go, I can expect it now, I can know where to expect it. One of the big barriers has been those businessmen like the Cllr brothers who run McGill's, and whenever they say or any regulation and we're moving, that puts the fear up certain folk within. We should never kowtow down to folk like that. To essentially, it's public blackmail.
Any progress on extending the Glasgow subway?
You might have the Clyde Metro plan.
Yes, one of many plans to expand it.
Aye, so this one seems to have more teeth behind it to actually happen. The funding is the biggest thing. Again, is a frustration for me, because we saw last month or 2 months ago, Rachel Reeves announced £2 billion for North East England's metro system. Metro system around Manchester, nothing up in Scotland. Because it would cost, I think it was about £2 billion or so for the Clyde Metro plan to do that for the whole expansion. It's been something I've been working with Ellie from Get Glasgow Moving about, is to try to. She's grand. So we've been working together to press about if there's going to be consequential funding. Are we going to get our own £2 billion for the Clyde Metro, because that's what it deserves?
Yes.
So it covers not just like you say, it's with the Strathclyde region for SPT, because it's still SPT that runs, and it would be covering not just Glasgow, it would be expansions out through the Lanarkshires. Ellie had a really good phrase for it, which was about when I was talking about franchising and controlling the buses. That franchising is essentially phase 1 of the Clyde Metro. You would want to get your buses in order to be able to then help deal with your light rail, your other rail systems, so that everything is linked up in the public cohesion of
and an Oyster card.
Has that not been talked about in Glasgow?
It's been talked about, and that's been the big issue. It's not been actioned. Exactly. The way that you would action it, I think, is from having that franchising, because then you've got everything covered there in terms of the buses, the underground, and now ScotRail will be nationalised as well. ScotRail, so you could do your ticketed system when you've got the franchising going. So I mean, that's fair. It costs about 80 million to just franchise for the whole region, and that's not just Glasgow. So we could all chip and do it. It can happen.
Cancel George Square.
The big thing now has been about getting the guidance from the Scottish Government, because the Scottish Government has been sitting on the guidance for franchising buses for about 3 years. They've not given us any guidance about how to implement it. We've been waiting since COVID for that. So they said it will be coming this year. We've been saying that for a fair while now, so it needs to come now, because we're wanting it to, there is, to the SNP's credit and the council, they are keen as well to have franchising. So as soon as we get that guidance, I think it can get going.
Do the Greens have the ports on their site for nationalisation?
I believe so, yeah. Ardrossan has been one we've been campaigning about. Ferries in general has been an area we want to also broaden about the nationalisation. The ferries in particular for the islands, for Shetland and Orkney, they have these pod systems that they use in Japan, and it's a great economised system that you can use to make it a safe and pleasant journey to do it. Because right now you're sitting on wooden boards and all of this, and it's dire, and we need to drastically improve it if we want to use better inter-rail connections as well. So nationalisation.
Of course, we're thinking about the tunnels that the islands have, but Shetland, of course, is a special condition because it's really, really rich. Because of this money it gets off Salvo, which actually was a bribe for voting no way back in 1979 to the devolution. British state again dividing rule.
And that's the big push right now. So there's been a bit of a association up in Shetland, and now has my colleague Alexander up there has been trying to break that dependency essentially on Westminster through that oil company that's been they've been seeped into the soil of Shetland in a lot of ways. And it ties into what I was saying earlier with community wealth building and community projects funding it. That's been his big push about community-based renewables instead of being reliant on big oil companies essentially funding most of the politicians themselves up there. But when it comes to things like the public transport as well, ferries is something that they're keen to see also nationalised too.
And finally, how do we max the yes vote at Holyrood 2026?
I'll be quite biased because naturally I would say the Greens on the regional list is where you saw most of the results. I think there were 2 SNP MSPs on the regional list compared to our last election. We missed out by 500 votes to get a second seat here in Glasgow, and we lost that seat to the Tories on the regional list instead. That could well happen again. We keep missing by roughly that margin. That happened in 2021, it happened in 2016 as well. Where we both times we lost to the Tories.
The most obvious people then.
On the region, I would say so. Well, I was going to say apart from the south of Scotland, but we also missed out there by 500 votes, losing that seat to, I want to say, a Labour MSP on the regional list. So we came close to winning more seats. We almost, if 1,000 votes went a different way, we would have had 10 in 2021, for example. But because regional votes slightly went a different way,
We need to be sassy.
Votes SNP really are weak.
Yeah,
In
like,
areas where the SNP are very weak, like the borders.
and we, as the Greens, we won't be winning many, if any, constituencies. We're like the opposite of where we probably will be in certain ones after Westminster there, and the council elections as ones we're projected to potentially win now, given how votes have been going with constituencies. So, like the south side of Glasgow, we generally could win now. Edinburgh Central, I think we've been projected to win a few times now in the polls. It's like the poll opposite of where the SNP are. The SNP win quite a lot of constituencies, maybe a few on the list. We win quite a bit on the regional list. We could probably this time win maybe 1 or 2 constituencies, and that's where the balance kind of is that outside those constituencies, the regional MSPs is where a lot of our MSPs will be. And where I think we'll see the results help shape that majority for independence in the Parliament.
We'll have to leave the Bacchus bar there. Really interesting conversation, went round an awful lot of topics, as I'm sure you'll agree. And we just want to say thank you very much to Pensioners for Indy for hosting it, but also thank you very much to Cllr Anthony Carroll. Hopefully we'll see more of Anthony. He's a young man, he's got plenty to say for himself.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sure he'll be out campaigning for next year's Holyrood election, even although he's not standing himself.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.